Hello, it's time for another Gita video, and today we're doing chapter 6, verse 33 to 45, a pretty long one. But I don't think there's an easy way to cut this section into smaller bits. So, and this will get us moving along, I guess. That's a good thing. You'll remember in the previous video, in the last few verses, Krishna had been describing to Arjuna the process of a person who, by concentration and disciplining of the mind, can achieve centeredness of the soul. And now in verse 33, Arjuna gives his reply. So, Arjuna said, "The system you have broadly described, great warrior, seems impossible to me. I know I'm too restless and unsteady. Krishna, the mind is an unstable thing, constantly in strong turmoil and uncontrollable. I think that to focus it would be as difficult as trying to catch the wind." The Blessed One said, "Great warrior, there is no doubt that the mind is unstable and difficult to focus. But through practice, son of Kunti, and detachment, it can be focused. In my opinion, unity is extremely difficult to obtain without disciplining the mind. But a centered soul is a realistic goal that can be achieved if you know the right means." Arjuna said, "What of one who had the trust but could not achieve unity due to a troubled mind and then fails in mysticism? Krishna, what is the fate of such a person who has failed to reach the highest? Krishna, mighty warrior, being thus unsuccessful in both material and spiritual ambitions, such a person could not belong in either realm. Lost from the path of the divine, will he not perish like a scattered cloud? This is my doubt, Krishna. I ask you to satisfy my doubts. Other than you, I am not sure anyone else could do this." The Blessed One says, "Son of Partha, nothing is destroyed in this world or the other. Thus, no one is truly lost who has started on this path." Love that line. "One who has done this work but not completed it will reach higher realms, and after dwelling there for many years will again take birth in a wealthier spiritual household. He might take birth in the family of mystics who are wise, but this type of birth is very rare. He will be able to regain the level of enlightenment that he had in his previous form, and after that may continue on the way of perfection, son of Kuru. Due to his past work, he will be drawn automatically to the practice. He will be curious about yoga, and will see past the dogmas of ritualistic religion. Working in discipline, such a mystic is cleansed of wrongdoing. After many births, having achieved the great power, he attains the highest." So, in the first couple of verses, 32 and 33, Arjuna is responding to Krishna's description of disciplining the mind by expressing his doubts. He recognizes he's smart enough to know his own mind, and he recognizes that the instability within his own mind, that the noise in his own mind is so great that he cannot prevent himself from hearing it, from being distracted by it. He says it's as difficult as trying to catch the wind. And Krishna says to him, there's no doubt the mind is unstable and difficult to focus. But with practice and detachment, it can be focused. It's extremely difficult to obtain without, unity is extremely difficult to obtain without disciplining the mind. This cough isn't COVID, by the way. There's dust in the room. I think it's an allergic reaction. But a centered soul is a realistic goal that can be achieved if you know the right means. So what Krishna says there is that if first of all, it's notable that Arjuna is self-aware enough to realize the difficulty of controlling one's own mind, right? And then he looks at all of these things that the mind does, and he thinks it's got to be pretty much impossible to be able to effectively discipline the mind. Now, Krishna responds to him that there's no question that it's very difficult, but if you don't manage to discipline the mind, then the achieving of unity will be very, very hard. So disciplining the mind here involves concentration and achieving concentration practices to avoid the mind, the distractions that the mind creates. And this isn't hard, but it is possible. And then he adds, but a centered soul is a realistic goal that can be achieved if you know the right means. So first you have to work to discipline the mind, but the reason for this isn't just to quieten the mind, right? One of the common errors that people make about spiritual attainment is to think that, well, if my mind is completely silent, which never actually happens, by the way, but if my mind is completely silent, then that's enlightenment. And that's not it. That's, a silent mind is just a silent mind. That's all it is. So that's not the reason to try to remove the distractions of the mind. It has nothing to do with achieving something inside of the mind. It has to do with the necessity of that to the purpose of being centered, of finding your center, which is to say showing up in the here and now. And that's a very important point. After this, Arjuna says, but what about, he basically says, what about someone who trusted this and tried to do this, but then he couldn't achieve it because his mind is too troubled, and so he fails in mysticism. And then, he failed in both things because he gives up all of his material ambitions to pursue the mystical, and then he failed in that too. And so such a person, will he not perish like a scattered cloud, right? He'll accomplish nothing. Arjuna's worried about accomplishing nothing in life. And this is a very interesting doubt, right? Like, what if it is all for nothing? And you have some people who will throw away elements of their material ambitions to pursue a spiritual path, or who will neglect their spiritual path to pursue their material ambitions, right? And in both cases, that can end up having this kind of a negative effect, right? Because you could end up going down the wrong spiritual path, getting yourself stuck in a mental trap, in a personal trap, in a group that is not really productive, or with some kind of a fake teacher or something like that. And suddenly you'll find that you've dedicated years of practice and haven't achieved anything. On the other hand, if you already had an inclination towards the spiritual, you reject it. You say, no, I'm going to focus on my work. I'm going to do this and that. Once something happens, an event happens that kind of gives you that first moment of that first flash of the significance of the spiritual journey, it becomes very hard to authentically escape it, because you might be able to try to deny that part of you and say, no, I've got to run a business. I've got to become a race car driver, whatever it is you want to do in life in the material sense. And you end up in a situation where somehow whatever that you thought was your material ambition ends up feeling shallow and meaningless if you don't pursue the spiritual. So it's actually like a catch-22, right? There's tremendous risks in pursuing the spiritual path. And then there's also the fact that once you're already thinking about pursuing the spiritual path, you're never really going to find any other satisfaction if you don't pursue the spiritual path. So the thing is, this isn't really an all or nothing game. People have this idea of, well, if I'm really going to pursue a spiritual path, I have to go and become a monk somewhere, even though monks actually, 99 out of 100 monks achieve nothing in their spiritual life. Or that you have to, or live in a cave or something like that. You have to abandon your material possessions. And then what you would hope or you would expect from all this is that in a few months or maybe a few years at the most, or maybe a decade, or at the very least before you die, you become a spiritual master. You become enlightened. And if you don't do that, then you've wasted your whole life, right? But if you're thinking like that, you're being motivated by desire, by what the Buddha very comfortingly, I guess, called it was the last or the golden desire, right? The desire for enlightenment itself, the desire for spiritual attainment, which comes out of a pure motive, a motive of discovering that union. But it also carries with it a bunch of other baggage of other potentially less altruistic or less pure motives that could also be associated with that, with this assumption. First of all, the idea of I have to win, right? I have to be able to achieve this because if not, I'm a loser, right? Which is basically what Arjuna is saying. You're driven to trying to achieve something, and you must achieve it in your way. That's another less altruistic assumption within that spiritual path, that you want to try to force the change to happen. Not just, it's not enough for you to achieve spiritual consciousness or to become enlightened or to unite with God, but it has to be on your terms, right? Not the universe's or God's or anybody else's. Arjuna is telling himself, well, I should just, on the one hand, I should just pursue my interests. I mean, he was a prince, right? He was a person of great power. I should continue to do my career as a warrior and a prince, because otherwise, if I waste my time in mysticism and don't get enlightened, then I'll have wasted everything. But that sort of mentality in and of itself is a materialistic mentality. It's a mentality of spiritual materialism, of wanting to have spirituality work on your terms and to achieve what you imagine it's got to achieve, and all of that, right? Krishna cuts this off in a particularly clever way with another one of my favorite verses of the Bhagavad Gita, in verse 40, where he says, "Son of Partha, nothing is destroyed in this world or the other. Thus, no one is truly lost who has started on this path." So what he then goes on to talk about there is that if you do not complete it in one lifetime, then, well, you will still, none of the work you did was for nothing, right? And he phrases it in the context of, well, then you'll spend time in a spiritual realm and then be reborn into a wealthy household, or the household of mystics, a family of wise mystics. He notes this type of birth is very rare. And then you will already be able to regain the level of enlightenment that you had in your previous form and continue on the path of perfection. And due to the past work, he will be drawn automatically to the practice. He will be curious about yoga and see past the dogmas of ritualistic religion. So he will become someone who has already put in some time in the next incarnation, according to Krishna, will be able to have a better sense of seeing through the parts of spirituality that are just kind of social engineering, and then also the parts that are maybe cheap spiritual materialism, right? And then working in discipline, such a mystic is cleansed of wrongdoing. After many births, having achieved great power, he achieves the highest. So Krishna's response, in a way, first cuts off all of the premise of Arjuna, of this all or nothing mentality, right? It's not an either or situation. So Arjuna's entire idea is based on this groundless fear. And the purpose of mysticism is not really to become enlightened, which is what Arjuna thought and what many, many people think. The purpose is first to become more human, to achieve the fullness of your humanity. And this is what you accomplish by the very act of practicing cultivation or meditation. Enlightenment is an end process of becoming more human. But if you're just thinking of that, it's like, you're thinking of becoming an astronaut when you don't know how to ride a bike. Like there's no it's not. That isn't the goal. The goal is the process of the movement of enlightenment, of cultivation. And there is a step at the end of one thing, but it's also the beginning of another, because as long as you're human and as long as you're alive, you are constantly changing, right? So an enlightened person, after enlightenment, has a different type of cultivation to do, and they are also constantly changing. So this is something where people will sometimes, on their quest for enlightenment, try to see themselves as more inhuman, right? As like to separate themselves from their own humanity, and that's not the goal. The goal is not to have a completely quiet mind. It's to be able to get out of the mind and centered in yourself. And the mind is still okay. It's not a bad thing, right? Because if it was, you wouldn't be human, right? So this is a process where a lot of people who get into these serious, hardcore spiritual practices seem to gradually want to dehumanize themselves, which is actually leading them away from the goal of enlightenment, because you can't get to enlightenment unless you're completely human. So you have to go through the steps of becoming more human at every step, being able to experience in greater fullness the human ability of the body, of the mind, of the heart, and of the soul. All of these things, you can't deny any part of any of them. You have to embrace them and then rectify them, like make them whole, so that they are not representative of something apart from reality, but they're instead representative of reality. And when Krishna talks about, he talks about ascending to higher realms and then reincarnation and that stuff, you don't have to necessarily accept the idea of reincarnation if you don't want to. Because this is still a truth that exists regardless of that part of his argument. There's no loss. Nothing is destroyed. No level at which you grow is a loss. So any growth that you achieve, any process that you make, even if you give up, even if you turn away, you will still have had a victory, because you've gotten a certain level, a certain step of achievement that can never go away. It's not, you can never unlearn what has been learned. You can never ungrow what has been grown. Once you have a glimpse, it can never be taken away from you. And so if let's say that this life is it. This life is all there is. There is no other reincarnation. There are no higher realms. There's none of that. Even there, in the practice of cultivation, there's nothing you could have done that would have been any better than being somebody who was dedicated to truth, to union, to harmony, and to discipline within yourself, and to virtue that you would then put out into the world. And those are the kind of the principles of any true mystical practice. This is not the same as having, wasted your life repeating a mantra in a cave and achieved nothing for yourself and done nothing for the rest of the world. Granted, right? But whatever bits you got, even let's say if you did that, whatever bits you got out of that is still something that was of a benefit to you. And nothing is really lost. I mean, if there is no reincarnation, there are no higher realms, then nothing was lost by doing that, right? What matters is how much you were able to grow. And there's never any moment, as long as you're still human, as long as you're still alive, when you've wasted something, because whatever you've already gained, you've already gained. And while you're still alive, there's always the chance to go forward and to gain more. Mysticism isn't like a religion where what you're doing is supposed to be for the hope of some reward later in life, right? The reward is the journey itself. It's what you are doing. It's walking the path, and in that path, living a life of increasing awareness and becoming more human. That's the reward. The reward is actually doing it. It's not something that happens at the end of that journey. And if you don't take that perspective, you're going to fail at your cultivation practice, and you're also going to be unable to really appreciate anything else that you tried to do, because that's also the case of everything you do in the human experience, right? So the reality is you're whatever you achieve in terms of your own ability to grow in virtue, to grow in consciousness, to grow in reality, to become more united to the world as it is rather than the world that you are apart from. That's going to be good and will be continued to do good if you took action on the basis of your virtue long after your own existence. So after that, all of existence benefits from whatever increased awareness you had and what you were able to do with it when you were alive. So keep that under consideration. Now, if you also accept the idea of reincarnation, then you know that there's, and you know, Westerners' ideas about reincarnations are usually pretty bad, though a lot of Easterners too. But the important thing to consider is that what you have done before, it can be taken up again, right? And that's true in this lifetime or in other lifetimes, whichever way you want to look at it. So that's everything for today. If you like this video, please feel free to subscribe. If you just happened upon this video, keep in mind this is a part of a larger playlist of the Bhagavad Gita. You might want to go back and look over the whole playlist. You might want to check out the rest of my channel and look at all the other playlists there, including the ones on the tarot, the runes, Qigong, and the I Ching, the Yifa Society. And feel free to subscribe, to share this video with people. And if you're interested in a path of spiritual cultivation, then get in touch with me about joining the Yifa Society, which is not based on the Bhagavad Gita, but it is a system, another system of internal cultivation that is meant to do this, to help you become more human. And if you're not quite ready for that, but you do want to keep up with what I'm posting and so on, please feel free to sign up. There's going to be a link in the description to the Yifa Society newsletter, which is free. And when you subscribe, the email that you receive to confirm your subscription will have a link in it to a free PDF of The Path and the Power, which is my version and commentary of the Tao Te Ching, which you might find very interesting. And it's free. So, and we very rarely send out any emails to that list. So you're not going to get spam. None of your email isn't going to go to somewhere else. It's completely no strings attached. Anyways, that's everything for today. Thank you very much.